Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. I know 3 o'clock's a little bit of a rough time to get online for a webinar, but I appreciate you being here. Typically, this is not how I would like to teach. I don't like to lecture, and I definitely can't see you. So we're going to give it a shot. When you have questions or you want me to stop, if you could please just drop something in the chat. And then hopefully Arlen can let me know that that's there and we'll stop and have some conversation. So the title, like Arlen said, is called Life Happens, Then They Teach: The Power of Second Career Educators. This is an important topic to me. I am a second career educator. I'm currently the languages department chair at Wakanda High School. I taught a few years at Wheeling High School as well, but before that, I worked in publishing for about 4 years. And after sitting at a desk grading papers essentially for about 8 hours a day, I decided that I wanted to do something else, something more meaningful, which is what a lot of second career educators wind up considering before they switch careers. So as we go in today, as we go through this webinar, I plan to weave in some stories that I heard while I was writing my dissertation on this topic. I'd like to share those stories with you. I'd like to hear from you. So again, when you have anything to chime in, please drop that in the chat. I don't feel like that's interrupting. I don't feel like that's intrusive. So we will move forward. In the chat, can you tell me, if you know, how many second career educators you have in your building or in your department? And then bonus points if you can tell me where they came from. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. How many second career educators are in your building or your department? And bonus points if you can tell me what their previous field was. Joseph has 2 out of 9 in his department, and it looks like they both came from corporate. Anybody else? Okay. In your department at the university, 2 of the 4 are second career instructors. 1 came from corporate and 1 came from public education, and now working at the university level, which I'm sure is very different. Give it a few more seconds. 3, 1 military, 2 corporate. Okay, great. Okay, so as we go through, I want to talk about how second career educators are different. You can read the slide, but I want you to think about people who used to lead businesses, served in the military, cared for patients, had this whole other career that was robust and that they enjoyed for a period of time. And now those people are standing in front of children or teenagers. Second career educators are professionals. They come in with different wisdom, with different levels of resilience, and with some real world relevance, and they carry that into the classrooms that they work in. So we jumped ahead and we did this already. But Shalonda says she has 1 in her department who also came from corporate. Okay, so it looks like most of us have 1 or 2. Here's why they matter. So their experiences help enrich the lessons that they're teaching. They have different ways of inspiring students, and they bring a different authenticity to learning. Second career educators kind of bridge that gap between theory and practice, and they are able to relate to where our students are heading. They get to say things like, when I was out in the world, when I worked for a State Farm, when I was in the military, this happened. And because they have those experiences, they tend to get more buy-in from students. I want to talk a little bit about how they transition into teaching, and then toward the end of this presentation, talk about how we can best support them. So for many of them, the reason that they switch careers is that they're looking for something that feels more meaningful. They've sold insurance for 20 years and it's been lucrative and it's been great, but now they're feeling like they really want to make an impact. Depending on how long they've been in these other careers, they've lived completely other lives, full lives, and they're looking to give back and do something that they feel like has a purpose. And so the motivations for many of them to change careers is a lack of passion for their previous career, some level of burnout. They start looking and they find alternative teaching prep programs. And many of the people that I encountered in my research had come across some kind of life or family change that prompted them to switch careers also. So alternative teacher programs. This is something that I went through and that a few of the teachers I have on my staff currently have gone through. But many of the people who I talked to through my research decided to pursue teaching certification through these programs because the coursework was local, taught in a cluster or online, and it takes about 18 months to 2 years to get through the program. So one of the motivations is, okay, I don't have to go back and get a 4-year degree. I can get this done in a short amount of time. On the flip side of that, the people I talked to recommended that teacher prep programs be reevaluated. So they talk about irrelevancy of coursework, that they had to take a history of education class. And this participant said, I didn't really need to know the history of education at the moment. I needed to know how things were currently changing as I was getting ready to walk into a building and walk into student teaching. And another participant talked about how the classes were pretty good and gave him good foundations, but he didn't feel like he had learned anything until he stepped into the classroom and started student teaching. So when we think about supporting people who are coming from previous careers, I thought these two quotes were really important. That the coursework that they've taken doesn't make them experts in education, and that depending on how their student teaching situation went, that's where they feel like they learned the most. And obviously they still have a lot to learn after student teaching. Another motivation for change was the lack of passion for their previous careers. Some of them said their careers grew repetitive, or they were frustrated with the direction of the field or the industry that they were in. And that prompted the change. And then again, like I said before, life and family changes. Major life events served as a motivation for career change. And so marriage, divorce, babies, loss of parents, near-death experiences cause people to reevaluate and decide, maybe I want to get into a career where it feels more meaningful. This participant said that he was looking for stability. He wanted something that felt important, and he wanted to use his skill set in a different way. So the benefits that second career educators can bring to your school or to your department is that they come with life and career experiences. And because they are a little bit older, have some maturity, they can be models of professionalism, perseverance, and adaptability. And that these are traits that we are trying to teach our students as well. So they're kind of walking the walk, right? Second career educators can set strong examples for younger teachers, and they're able to mentor them in some of the softer skills that they may struggle with because they went to high school and then they went to college and then they went back into a school building. They have no other experience than the education track. And so sometimes with younger teachers, some of the softer skills that I'm seeing that some of the teachers on my staff are lacking is honestly communication. I have teachers on my staff who've never used a landline phone, and we ask them to call parents and we ask them to call from a landline. and we are literally training them how to use a phone. They don't have great email etiquette because, again, some of them are so young, they don't really write or read emails very often. That is a training that our younger teachers need and our second career educators do not need. Conflict resolution. If you're 21 or 22 and you've just stepped into a building, that's a place you're going to need to grow. If you've been working and selling industrial machinery for 30 years, conflict resolution may not be a skill that you need training in. And so we can tap into the skill sets that second career educators already have and use them to be models and mentors for our younger staff. Another benefit is that they bring the real world into the classroom, right? So students see the relevance in their stories when teachers connect lessons to industries, professions, and life experiences. And that learning becomes memorable and meaningful when those teachers can share experiences from their own life. So a woman that I know was a chemist for Culligan. She returned to school, got her teaching license, and she has taught chemistry for the last 20 years. But when she references herself in her classroom as when I was a chemist, when I worked for Culligan, she gets more buy-in from students. They want to ask about the field. They want to ask about what she did, why she left, what was great about the field, what was less great about the field. And so we need to make sure that we are able to let second career educators capitalize on that and really bring students in to the content through their own life experiences. Another benefit for second career educators is this idea of engaging students in new ways. It's kind of tied into this previous slide. The students respond to authenticity, right? And so when they teachers share their own stories, they're able to bring students in a little bit more. And then one of the other benefits would be resilience in action. Second career teachers are adaptable learners. When they return to school to get their teaching licenses, some of them were married, had small children, or like we talked about, had just had a major life change. They've tackled this career transition and they bring that same mindset into their teaching, that their students are capable of doing hard things because they have done hard things. We'll come back to this idea of resilience a little bit later when we talk about career changers and we talk about the idea of the financial commitment and the time away from family that it takes to return to school and that level of commitment. Another benefit to second career educators is this idea of collaborative strength. So their backgrounds in the work environment equips them with strong communication, teamwork, and leadership skills. And these are vital things in their communities. If you have second career educators in your department or you work alongside some, on a scale of 1 to 10, can you drop a number in the chat of how often you see some of these skills that we've talked about as a benefit? This idea of being collaborative, being able to mentor younger teachers, in the soft skills, having kind of more natural leadership skills. On a 1 to 10, where do you see that in your second career educators? Give you a little bit of time to drop that into the chat. Or have we not noticed that yet? I'm seeing an 8, an 8, an 8 out of 10, depending on the individual. Okay. Right. And so I'm going to argue that it's fantastic that these second career teachers are operating in these ways within our departments, within our schools. But I'm going to argue that our school districts or our leadership might be missing out by not knowing who their second career educators are. Okay, I think this is the last benefit slide. One of the other benefits they bring in is this idea of empathy and emotional intelligence. These are adults who have navigated life challenges. Sometimes they have their own children and their own families, and so they bring some patience and some emotional depth to the classroom that a 21-year-old single person may not be able to yet. And so they can serve as parents in the classroom. They're more in tune maybe with young children or teenager emotions, and they're able to support in a different way. So studies that I've seen indicate that second career teachers demonstrate higher levels of commitment to the field of education because they've been other places. They come in to teaching and they recognize not only how important it is, but how enjoyable it can be. They find joy in places that people who've done it since they were in their early 20s may have overcome already or may start feeling burnt out. They come in with empathy, and their instructional quality compared to first career counterparts can be better because they have a significant depth of knowledge in the content area they're teaching. This is especially true for high school. So I just wanted to show this to you. This comes from my dissertation. These are some of the people that I interviewed. And it shows you their previous career field, how long they did it, and their years in teaching. And so if you look at where they're coming from, they come from a variety of areas. What I found interesting was a lot of them come from sales. You guys put in the chat that you have teachers who came from corporate. I assume that's similar: sales, advertising, marketing. But we had in here a professional basketball player right in the middle of that chart, who played overseas for a while and then worked for the Board of Trade. And one of the things that he touched on in his interview was how surprised he was coming into education by the lack of trust that the people above him, the school board, his administrators, had for teachers. He talked about how he, in his previous career, had traded millions of dollars on the floor of the Board of Trade. He was trusted to make these tremendous economic trades, but when he came to the first school that he worked at, he was not allowed to have keys to the front door of the building. If you can jot down in the chat for me some way that you feel like we can create, thinking of how I want to word this, how we can address the idea of lack of trust, or if you think that's a common thing that your teachers, first career or second career, experience, because that did become a running theme in the research I showed. So thumbs up or thumbs down if you feel like trust is something we need to work on across the board for educators. I'm going to come back to that after. I got one thumbs up so far. Okay. Okay. So I feel like I'm getting some confirmation here. I feel like this is not intentional, right? But if you've only ever taught, again, if you went from high school to college back into a high school or a middle school or even an elementary school, you may not know any different. If you've been a staff writer for the Chicago Tribune, if you've been an accountant for 11 years, if you were a patent attorney for 25 years, and in your previous field, you felt like people trusted you as the professional, and you transfer into education, this is an area where our second career educators feel very differently from how our first career educators feel. And it's important. I think it's something that districts need to pay attention to, and professionally develop a little bit differently than we are professionally developing people who are in their first career. Okay, so second career teachers come in and they have a little bit of a different philosophy. They understand the value of the real world experience they bring with them, and they talk about it in their classrooms. They believe, the ones that I interviewed, all believed that teaching is about more than grades. Grades are important. We understand parents want good grades. We understand in the high school world that there are scholarships tied to grades. But they don't assign the grade a student earns to the quality of that student in their room. They're able to better separate out that the work is the work and the person is the person, and those two things are very different. Second career educators have a more grow the whole student kind of philosophy, and they look for internalized learning less than they look for what is the score that you got on this quiz or test. And then these are a few quotes. One of the people I talked to expressed that he wanted to be able to take this package at the beginning of the year and turn it into an even better student by the end of the year or midway through the year. That was his goal for students. The other quote says, I want to build an emotionally stable person, or at least have a hand in that. So that kind of reveals more of their philosophy. Second career educators can be a hidden asset to schools. Again, they bring these diverse perspectives, professional experiences, and they are lifelong learners. And I thought this quote from Sowell was maybe one of the most impactful things that people said in my interviews. Is he said, I've been out in the world where most of the students that you are going to teaching will eventually be. And again, if you've come from high school to college back into school, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a different experience. His argument was, we're preparing students for a world that some teachers have never been out in. And so he felt like he had advantages. Okay, so again, the skill sets they bring: emotional intelligence, communication skills, maturity and confidence. They have a content area knowledge that is different, or it has more depth than first generation or first career teachers, and they have different time management skills. We talked a lot about transferable skills. So the participants expressed that they did not feel nervous about contacting parents of students or about meeting with superiors. They understood how to communicate with both teenagers and adults. And so even though they've only just walked into education, parent-teacher conferences are not an issue. IEP and 504 meetings, they're not intimidated by those. They're not hesitant to participate, and they're comfortable in their evaluation meetings about their performance, asking questions and looking for ways to grow. There's a maturity level here that I think makes them a benefit to a school or a department. Okay, so once you find them in your building or out in the wild and you recruit them, what do they need once they come on your staff? So we need to talk about some of the challenges that they've faced coming in. So transitioning into teaching is not without hurdles. There are certification requirements. Many of them will be taking a pay cut to come teach. There are some classroom management learning curves because the only experience they had with school was maybe decades ago. And so support is important here. We have a tendency, I think, to assume that everyone's preparation to walk into the school was the same and that they should be prepared. And I think second career educators have a different learning curve than people who spent 4 years as an undergrad studying education. So their support is important here. We can ease their transition with mentorship, some onboarding, and some peer networks that are tailored to leverage their experiences while also developing their pedagogy at the same time. So again, support matters. So when I talked to them, second career teachers, what they asked for was mentors with similar experience, which this might be a difficult piece. This requires a school district having a list or some way of knowing who their second career educators are and connecting them in a mentorship experience. All of the people I talked to were thankful for the mentors that they were given and said that those mentors were helpful in a lot of ways, but they were not able to connect to the idea of this transition from a previous experience into education. And so there was a gap there in the mentoring. They asked for continued support from their peers. What that means is they felt like sometimes people forgot that they didn't know everything about education. And they asked for time and patience to adjust to the new career and to adjust to working with students. And they asked for differentiated professional development. Let me talk about that. So, mentors with similar experiences. If possible, I think it would benefit school districts to pair second career educators with other second career educators, even if they aren't in the same content area. But this would require the principal or the district office to have a list or to keep track of who their second career educators are. They need to hear that other people have belief in their abilities. This can be education, a frustrating job. For many second career educators, it requires a pay cut and it has kind of uprooted their lives. And so they need to hear once in a while that they're doing a good job, that people believe in them, and that it was worth it, that this change was worth it. They do feel the isolation that comes along with teaching in a classroom all day alone or 6 periods a day alone in different ways because they're used to a much more collaborative field. And so again, I'm going to say again, support matters here. When they ask for time and patience, they're asking for others to give them time to adjust. And for the patience of others, when they don't know something that might be obvious to people who studied education and who have a lot of experience in best practice. They need some time to establish themselves with teenagers. They need to have time to build up their reputation as a teacher. And they really need to learn how to balance planning, preparation, and grading, as we all did at the start. They're just trying to do it, with potentially with families at home. When they ask for differentiated professional development, second career educators are discussing the idea of needing different professional development. They talk about it in terms of like the nuts and bolts of the job. And some of the things they said was that they found it interesting that adults needed to set norms for meetings. This is not something that they were used to, and they didn't understand why administration, as a blanket statement, was treating adults as children who didn't know how to conduct themselves in a meeting. They wanted time to learn the online programs that they would be using daily, and they did not feel like they needed to learn about how to build relationships or why those relationships were important. They felt like that kind of professional development was a waste of time. If you can drop ideas into the chat, please, about other ways we can differentiate professional development. Think about your institute days. Think about the first few days of the school year where we sit in a lot of training. How can we break out our large group of teachers into a group of second career teachers, a group of first career teachers, and what might help us differentiate? Take some guesses at what else we could use or we could teach to second career educators that would not be a waste of time. Please drop a couple ideas in the chat for me. What else might they need that would be different from what first career educators need? There's no wrong answers. Classroom management skills. Lack of understanding in adult learning theory in the part of education has been a deficiency for decades. So that's what's creating the poor professional development. They provide professional development on content specific to their needs. So break out into content groups. I like that idea. Joe, when you are saying classroom management skills, do you have one or two that you think specifically someone might come into education in their 30s or 40s and they might not have this specific skill in terms of classroom management? social emotional learning, trauma informed. That is definitely something I did not get in an alternative teacher prep program, but that was also a long time ago, so they may be better at that. I'm gonna wait a couple more seconds. Educational acronyms. Shalonda, that's a huge one. We walk around and we throw out acronyms. Of course, I'm going to blank now. BIP. If I didn't know what BIP stood for, when I was in a meeting, I would definitely have to stop and ask, or worst case scenario, fake like I know what it means. Acronyms is a big one. Joe, ability to relate to students' character development and cognitive ability. So just kind of understanding where our students are cognitively and character development wise. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. And so this, for me, this is, it's my biggest ask, I guess, from school districts is if we want to fully develop the people on our staff, then we need to know who's on our staff. And I understand that that is incredibly time consuming, to know who you have, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. But I think if we are talking about developing people for the betterment of students, then differentiated professional development is a must. So as often as possible, when staff is provided professional development, I think it should be differentiated. I think the days of 150 teachers sitting in an auditorium, all learning the same thing is only helpful for maybe 50 of those teachers. There must be a way that we can divide up new teacher onboarding. So if you're a first career teacher, this is when your training is. If you're a second career teacher, this is when your training is. And certainly some of that can overlap. But I think potentially we are wasting a lot of time by training everyone in the same way. Institute days can have two different lenses. I think there's a lot of things we can do here to differentiate professional development, but again, it goes back to knowing who's on your staff. One of the other things that I learned was that second career educators never truly leave their first profession, right? So they bring deep content knowledge, maturity, and experience into their schools. We have a woman on staff here who was an accountant for 12 years. She teaches one section of accounting and then a variety of other classes. We aren't really tapping into her potential. I understand that it's potentially hard to run more than one section of accounting. Maybe there aren't that many students interested, but we could be maybe changing the direction of registration towards that a little bit, tapping into students who enjoy math, who maybe don't know if they like accounting yet or not. The other theme was that professionalism means trusting them. So we come back to this idea of the person who was allowed, trusted, his job was to trade on the board of trade, to trade for the board of trade millions of dollars. And then he was not allowed to have keys to the front door of the building, to let himself in on weekends or when he wanted to come in and work. So the study found that second career educators are motivated by the desire to do something more meaningful and impactful, but that teacher preparation programs they attend do not adequately prepare them for parts of the job. And second career educators need mentors and professional development aligned with their areas of ignorance relating to public education and the very individualized weaknesses they have relating to the content area they will be teaching. But second career educators remind us that teaching isn't just a job, it's a calling. Most of us are here because we feel drawn to it. We feel drawn to make a difference, and that this field welcomes those who want to make a difference no matter when they start. Oh, I skipped a comment I wanted to make earlier, but we'll circle back to that. So when we go back to the idea of trust, one of the things that came up was that because second career educators sometimes look older, right? They look like they're in their 30s or their 40s. People assume that they know things that a seasoned educator would know. Okay. And so we talked about the idea of acronyms. We talked about the idea of classroom management skills. That's something that they express strongly. Okay. So this idea of starting over and the idea of differentiating their professional development is really kind of the focus, is we need to know who we have, figure out what their needs are, and then support them to the best of our ability. If you're in a very large district, this is a very large job. What kind of questions, I wanted this to be a little bit more discussion now, since you guys are in the chat. What kind of questions can I answer for you? Or what kind of stories do you have about second career educators in your building, how they're successful or where you see them needing support? You drop that into the chat, please.
And also, if anybody would like to share on the microphone, all you have to do is go down to the React button and raise your hand. I believe that's in there. Yes, raise your hand and I can unmute your microphone. But chat is also welcome. So we just got those two options for you.
So if you have questions, or if you can share a story about second career educators in your building, where they're succeeding or where you see them struggling. The issue of isolation is shared among second career educators and traditionally prepared teachers. This is an opportunity to build relationships and collaborate. I would agree that all teachers feel isolated to some extent. Being in the classroom 5 to 6 hours a day as the only adult, or maybe with a co-teacher once in a while, is isolating. I think the second career teachers feel it a little bit differently because they come from a field where they were more collaborative sometimes, where they worked on a team in a different way than you're able to do when you're in education. Any other stories or questions out there? So I have a teacher who I just hired this year, who's actually a second career educator. He went to college, stopped, dropped out, withdrew after 2 years, and he went and worked for a roofing company. And he worked for that company for 7 years. And he got to the point where he started thinking about going into management of this roofing company or moving up the ladder, and had a near-death experience and decided roofing wasn't it anymore, and went back to school, finished up his bachelor's, rolled right into his master's with his teaching certification. And he's young, he's 29. And working with him this year has been interesting. He has a lot of content knowledge, but there are things that he's still struggling with. He cannot get a handle on the amount of time he should be spending outside of his classroom on grading and planning and prep, which is common for all educators. But he has a 1-year-old baby and a wife that he's also balancing. So it's been interesting talking with him this year. Joe said to provide a platform for second career teachers to share their funds of knowledge brought in from their former fields. And Shalonda says, sometimes it's the opposite. Second career teachers may not have the skills to be collaborative and tend to be more isolated due to their previous careers. I did have a second career educator who lacked patience and empathy with challenging adolescents. Yeah, it's definitely not a fit for everyone. Joe, when you say that you would like to see a way to provide a platform for second career teachers to share their knowledge, do you envision that within, since I'm so high school specific, do you envision that within a department? Do you envision that more on a stage in front of the entire staff? Ryan Anderson, at my building, we have one elective teacher that's been super helpful to fill a need in our building, but teaching a singleton has made it difficult to give curriculum support and help build connection with other staff. His background is very different than others on staff. He's the only one teaching that, right? Yeah, that is challenging when it's hard to find someone in building for your people. We have some networks, I think, for my role, for other department chair roles. I'm sure there are teacher networks where even if there isn't someone in your building, you might be able to connect them with someone nearby, but providing that content support for someone teaching a singleton, that's hard. Okay. Does anyone know if their district has monitored, has tracked who comes in as a second career educator and who comes in as right out of college? Anybody have that knowledge for their district? How long did it take for the people? For them to adjust to being teachers, it a lot of them said 3 years. Shalonda, not specific numbers. Joe, not the 2 districts you were in, no specific tracking. Okay, I do think really that is probably the place we start. Okay, so Dan Coles said no official tracking, but he knew who they were. Okay, so in an effort to differentiate professional development, I guess that would be step 1, right, is figuring out who we have. I don't know, Shalonda, if ISB collects this information. Arlen, you're not sure? Or are you saying no, they don't?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure either. That'd be a good question. Something I could run past them to find out for sure.
Yeah, I'd really like to try to pilot differentiated professional development in the district I'm currently in. Have any of you seen or experienced differentiated professional development? Different from breakout rooms in your building where you get to choose your session? We've done some here where teachers get to choose what session they would like to go to, but we haven't differentiated them based on things like skill sets or deficiencies or strengths or experience. Thank you, Shalana. Yeah, I would like, teaching, obviously, you guys know, is getting kind of a bad rap right now. People aren't going into education as a major. People are leaving the field pretty quickly. And so when we are able to recruit new teachers, I personally, when I'm going through the hiring process, I personally look for second career educators because I know that they're coming in with some passion to do the job. It's not something they are doing because their parents did it and they felt some pressure to also major in education. They're not doing it because they weren't sure if they were going to like it or not. They aren't doing it as I'll teach for now until I figure out if I want to do something else. They're coming in from the opposite direction. They've done something else, and they want to do something meaningful. And so when I look and I go through the hiring process, I always do pull the applications of people who have some other different experience, and almost always they've been wildly successful. I think the trick now will be, how do we convince people to come into education from other fields? Like, what is the benefit? Especially if we're asking them to potentially take a pay cut and to return to school and commit 18 months to 2 years to getting a teaching license. The increased reliance on AI may result in more people leaving their current careers and becoming second career teachers. That's actually, that's a really good thought. Yeah, that's a really good thought. Any questions that I can answer? How long did it take me to adjust? I did 4 years in publishing. I would say it took me 2 years to really adjust, to start feeling comfortable. I knew when I worked in publishing, I knew what to expect every day. I walked in, I went to my office, I did the job, it was routine, and I went home. It took me 2 years to understand that walking in to a high school would never be the same thing on any given day, and that in high school teaching, you're looking at 140 to 150 students a day. So you have all those personalities to manage, behaviors to manage, content to teach. It took me 2 years, I think, to really get in a place where I wasn't nervous going into my classroom every single day. And where I started to feel like, okay, I can do this thing. And I think, that's when second career educators ask for time and patience, I think that's what they're referencing, is that it's not that they don't believe that they can't do the job. It might be 2 years of nerves of walking into the classroom before they really settle in. I wish parents understood this too. I wish parents understood a lot of things about educators. There wasn't a single person that I talked to for this research who had any regrets about doing this. And I thought that was interesting. I thought for sure someone would say, I did it. I went back to school. I got licensed. I spent the money. I did the time. I did the student teaching. And, you know, it really wasn't the right fit. It's not the right thing. There was not a single person who for a split second regretted the decision they made. And I had two people who chose to teach in low income districts intentionally because they felt like their previous careers, they had made such a good amount of money and they were so stable that they chose to find a district that really needed support and that really needed some stability, and they felt like they could offer that. They weren't going to jump into a low income district or a district that they knew on paper looked like it was struggling and then jump back out. They were going in to be stability and to make some change. Follow-up research. I would like to do some kind of tracking of second career educators. How long do they stay in the careers once they get in? Do they, you know, especially in the name of TRS, you know, they're never going to get full benefits from TRS. So how long do they stay? Do they do a decade? Do they do 2 decades? What do they measure as success? They talked a little bit about how they don't feel like grades are their measure of success. They don't look at student growth scores, standardized test scores, as their students being successful. Again, they look at more the whole person. Are they able to help them grow as a human? I would like to look at some of that. And I think my research was focused strictly on high school teachers. I would be curious if the K-8 buildings get many second career educators because high school is so content focused. We have a science department, a math department. Is it easier to transition from a career into a high school, or are the K-8 buildings also seeing second career educators come in? I would be curious about that. Do I think second career teachers are a good source of potential educational leaders? I do. I think they're perfect candidates. I also think they don't necessarily want to do that, not in a formal way. I think they come in because they want to work with students. They've worked with adults enough. Most of your second career teachers in district are in the high school and in the CTE department. Yeah, that makes sense. CTE is ever expanding right now, which is great. Do you guys have ideas on ways that we could provide second career educators like an initial level of confidence? What could we provide them right from day one that might help them reduce those nerves, those 2 years of nerves as they walk into the classroom? Do you have ideas on ways that would, or who should be supporting them maybe right out of the initial gate? Should it be principals, building leaderships, department chairs, or should it be more peer-to-peer? Or should it be both? Qualified mentors and coaches, like different from instructional coaches? Ryan, you think peer-to-peer is more effective if we can partner with other second career educators? I tend to agree with Ryan. I tend to agree with Ryan that if you can partner peers, you're getting a better overall vision of what's happening in the building. And this is not a dig at administration, but I know that, principals and assistant principals are so busy doing other work that they've become somewhat disconnected from teachers and students in the building at times. And so to be mentored by someone who doesn't do what you do during the day is especially hard. Which is why, I think that if we can connect second career educators with other second career educators, we're narrowing down that mentorship to even closer to what people need. Instructional coaches that spend the time necessary to provide support in the classroom. Yeah, that's a big one. And I think typically, elementary buildings have more coaches than high schools, but I may be wrong on that. Is there anything else I can answer, or any other stories or comments that you guys would like to share? Thank you. I enjoyed doing this. I was a little nervous, but it was fun. I'm glad you guys were here today.
Yes, me too, Stephanie. That was fantastic. Your passion for the topic is just very clear, and love all the research and support you've shown to second career teachers. It's fantastic. And thank you so much to our participants for joining in the conversation in chat. I know it's a little harder when you can't unmute and having to type it all in, but Dr. Fike, your wait time was impeccable.
Thank you. I have a lot of practice.
That's great. All right, it is officially 4 o'clock, so we are good to shut down the webinar. A couple of comments coming in. Stephanie, just to thank you for the presentation. Again, it was terrific. We've got it recorded now. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.